This man, Achim Joseph Marino.
In 1998, Achim Marino came forward and confessed to the rape and murder of a restaurant worker.
I did this awful crime and I was alone.
But this man, Chris Ochoa, had already confessed to that crime and was serving a life sentence.
I pleaded guilty and confessed.
One of them was lying. To find out who and why, scientists look once more at the forensic evidence. Austin, Texas, the state's capital city. 20-year-old Nancy DePriest lived here with her husband, Todd, and 15-month-old daughter, Sylvia.
She was so very friendly and very open to anyone. She just loved people. She was just like a people person.
Nancy was a waitress at a Pizza Hut restaurant. On October 24, 1988, she arrived for work at 7 a.m. Her job was to get the pizza dough ready for lunch before the rest of the employees arrived. The manager of the restaurant called several times that morning to make sure everything was all right, but there was no answer. When he stopped by the restaurant around 9:30, he found Nancy slumped under the bathroom sink, nude and barely alive. She had been shot in the back of the head. Nancy was rushed to the nearest hospital.
My son-in-law said, "Mom, there's been a robbery. They shot Nancy." I said, "Todd, how bad is she hurt?" He broke down and he said, "Mom, she's on life support."
Nancy died later that day without regaining consciousness.
I began to scream. I was totally hysterical.
The murder occurred before the restaurant opened, so there were no witnesses to the crime. The Austin Police Department found no signs of forced entry at the restaurant. The motive appeared to be robbery, since money was missing from the safe. On the floor of the bathroom, police found a .22 caliber shell casing from the murder weapon, and Nancy's autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted. 2 weeks later, investigators got their first break in the case. 2 employees from another Pizza Hut restaurant, 22-year-old Chris Ochoa and 19-year-old Richard Danziger, went to the restaurant where Nancy had been murdered.
So we ordered a beer and he toasted to the memory of Nancy.
To Nancy DePriest, we won't forget you.
To me, I found it kind of strange.
Nancy's co-workers quickly informed authorities. Ochoa and Danziger were later questioned by police.
He started grilling me about what I know about this murder and this rape, and I told him nothing. We went round and round for a couple hours. I don't recall how many hours. But he said, at one point, he said, "You know what? We know you're not capable of this, but we know you know something."
Detective Hector Polanco, at the time a 12-year veteran of the force, took over the interrogation.
At one point, he showed me pictures of death row. He showed them to me. He said, "This is where you will live until you die." So I still kept on saying, "I don't know anything."
Richard Danziger and his girlfriend, Donna Angstad, were also questioned.
They were absolutely horrible to me. One time, Hector Polanco pounded his fist on the table, and I thought he was coming across to grab me. I came up out of my chair and hit the wall behind me. It scared me so bad.
Donna said she and Richard were together in Donna's apartment at the time of the murder.
I took a lie detector test, and they told me I flunked it.
2 days later, Chris Ochoa confessed to the rape and murder of Nancy DePriest.
I did it. I pleaded guilty. And it was, I can't describe it.
He also revealed that his friend, Richard Danziger, was his accomplice. Ochoa said he and Danziger entered the restaurant with keys the two had obtained. They found Nancy alone, preparing pizza dough. After ordering her to remove the money from the safe, Ochoa said he and Danziger bound, gagged, raped, and shot her. Ochoa said he was the one who pulled the trigger. When the DNA results came back from the lab, police had even more proof that Ochoa and Danziger were the killers. Chris Ochoa not only confessed to the rape and murder of Nancy DePriest, he became the state's star witness against his friend and co-worker, Richard Danziger. Nancy's family was relieved that the case was concluded quickly.
Not so much satisfaction, I didn't feel that. I guess relief that they weren't going to be able to do it to someone else.
Bolstering Ochoa's confession was the DNA evidence. A blood sample from Chris Ochoa matched the DNA from semen on the victim's vaginal swab.
I examined a vaginal swab specimen from Nancy DePriest. DNA was extracted from spermatozoa on that swab, and then DNA typing was done using a single gene that we had available at that point in time, and a result was obtained from that gene that was actually compatible with Chris Ochoa, and about 10 to 16% of the population.
Statistically, there were 3 million other Texans who might have shared the same genetic marker. But this wasn't the only forensic evidence. A brown hair found in the restaurant bathroom was microscopically similar to Danziger's. Richard Danziger pled not guilty and insisted he was innocent. But the strength of Ochoa's confession and the forensic evidence were too great. The jury deliberated just 7.5 minutes and found Richard Danziger guilty of aggravated sexual assault. He was sentenced to life in prison. In return for his testimony, Chris Ochoa avoided the death penalty, but he was sentenced to life in prison.
And were nights that I would sit in my bed crying to God. Why? Why? I would ask him, I'm tired, God. Tired. I was very tired. And at some point, I wanted to end it all.
Life in prison was even harder for Richard Danziger. After 3 years behind bars, Danziger was assaulted by another inmate who mistook him for someone else. Danziger was kicked in the head with steel-tipped boots. He survived, but suffered permanent brain damage.
It's just, what's happened to him is horrible. He's going to need care for the rest of his life.
But the story doesn't end there. 8 years later, Austin police received a letter from Achim Marino, who was serving 3 life sentences in another Texas prison for a string of robberies and sexual assaults. Marino claimed that he was the one who raped and murdered Nancy DePriest. Marino claimed he had undergone a spiritual awakening while incarcerated and wanted to set the record straight.
I did this awful crime and I was alone.
Marino said the El Paso Police Department had the gun he used to kill Nancy DePriest. They had taken it when he was arrested on an assault charge. Homicide detective Manuel Fuentes was assigned to investigate Marino's story.
I got a call from El Paso police department, and the detective there said, "You're not going to believe this, but that gun hasn't been destroyed. We still have it in evidence."
Scientists compared Marino's .22 caliber handgun to the bullet removed from Nancy DePriest. The ballistic examination did not reveal a match. It appeared there wasn't much more to investigate. 2 years later, Achim Marino tried once again.
I want to thank Speaker Laney for your friendship.
This time, he sent a letter to then-Governor George W. Bush with a copy to the prosecutor's office.
I told him basically the same thing, that I had committed a murder in '88 at the Pizza Hut, and that there was 2 innocent men who I did not know locked up for it.
This time, Detective Fuentes visited Chris Ochoa in prison. Once again, Ochoa repeated what he had been saying for 10 years, that he and Danziger had acted alone.
And I told him, yeah, you're right, I did it. So you know what, just let me do my time.
And he said, as far as he knew, there wasn't a third person involved. It was just him and Richard that killed Nancy DePriest.
So there was little more authorities could do, especially since Ochoa's DNA matched semen found at the crime scene. It would take 1 more year before one of these men finally changed his story. For almost 11 years, Chris Ochoa continued to maintain that he and Richard Danziger were responsible for the rape and murder of Nancy DePriest. But 1 year after Achim Marino wrote a letter to the governor's office saying he murdered Nancy DePriest, Chris Ochoa changed his story.
Did you kill Nancy DePriest?
No, ma'am.
Just tell me you did. Look me in the face and tell me you did it.
Ochoa now claimed that his confession had been coerced. He said he was physically assaulted, threatened, and denied access to an attorney during police questioning.
A female detective, an Hispanic detective. She come in and I asked her, you know, can I have an attorney? And she got real upset and said, you can't have one until you're officially charged.
In search for help, Ochoa contacted the Wisconsin Innocence Project, a group that investigates cases in which they believe an innocent person has been wrongfully convicted.
And I told them, please help me. I don't know who else to turn to. You know, I think one of my closing lines was that I told them, I've lost faith in the system, but I haven't lost faith in myself.
But the founder of the Innocence Project, John Prey, wasn't sure what to think.
We called up Chris's attorney to get his side of things and say, sometimes the attorneys say, I'm concerned about this case and he may be innocent. Unfortunately, in this case, we got the complete opposite. Chris's attorney told us we are totally wasting our time on this case. He is very guilty.
And if Chris Ochoa was innocent, why did DNA tests place him at the scene of the crime? 12 years earlier, tests could only analyze one gene from Nancy DePriest's vaginal swab, the gene called DQ-alpha. But by the year 2000, the accuracy of DNA testing had advanced to a level where 10 genes could be analyzed.
The DNA testing that I'm doing today is more complicated, harder to interpret, more discriminating.
The Wisconsin Innocence Project asked local prosecutors to send Nancy DePriest's forensic samples for more sophisticated DNA testing, which they did. 12 years after Nancy DePriest's murder, Karen Scalise compared Chris Ochoa's blood DNA to the vaginal swab taken from the crime scene.
I sort of went, oh my God, and just immediately double-checked it to myself.
Just to make sure, additional DNA testing was also done by Ed Blake, who had performed the original DNA test a decade earlier.
When that work was done, ultimately Chris Ochoa, Richard Danziger, and Nancy DePriest's husband were all eliminated as the source of the spermatozoa from Nancy DePriest.
But there was still the issue of Marino's gun. Detective Fuentes decided to send it to another lab, the Southwest Institute in Dallas, for more tests.
The shell casing, without a doubt, matched the gun that we got from Achim Marino. And this was the shell casing that was found inside the Pizza Hut. So now we had DNA. Now we had a bullet or a shell casing that was ejected at the crime scene that matched the gun that we got from Achim Marino.
As a last step, prosecutors compared Achim Marino's DNA to the semen from Nancy DePriest's vaginal swab. It matched, just as Marino said it would.
Everybody says they're innocent in prison. But yeah, some of us actually are.
Achim Marino's confession includes a chilling account of what happened the day Nancy DePriest was murdered, but it also answered many questions.
I was wearing a workman's uniform with a false name on it. And I knocked on the side door, and Ms. DePriest came up and unlocked the door just before the restaurant opened.
Once inside, Marino held Nancy at gunpoint and demanded the restaurant's money.
Hey! Get into this thing. Get in there.
Then we went to the restroom where I disrobed her, then assaulted her one time. After that, I told her that I was going to handcuff her to the plumbing underneath the sink and leave her there. She got underneath the sink. I shot her in the back of the head one time with that .22 firearm.
But he made the mistake of leaving the shell casing behind.
I was looking for that shell, and I couldn't find it anywhere. After that, I went back, got my bag, packed my stuff up, and I left.
Marino says Nancy reminded him of a female guard he knew from prison, a woman he detested.
When I came out, not only did I intend to kill a whole bunch of blacks and Mexicans, but I told myself the first white woman I ran across that looked like I was going to blow her brains out, and that's exactly what I did.
But the bigger question is why Chris Ochoa would repeatedly confess to a crime he didn't commit.
You have to be a psychologist. I'm not. It's hard for me to conceive. In fact, when I first met Mr. Ochoa's attorneys and Mr. Danziger's attorneys, when they first brought me back, the first thing I asked them was, what in the world made Ochoa confess?
Most people will come and tell me, I would have never confessed to that. You know what? Don't tell me that, because you weren't sitting in that chair.
Ochoa said he was threatened with the death penalty unless he confessed, a technique most law enforcement interrogation experts say is improper.
The law, fortunately or unfortunately, allows police officers to lie to individuals being interrogated.
What they can't say is, if you don't confess to me, you're going to get the death penalty, if they knew that to be a lie, or if you do confess to me, I'll make sure you don't go to prison or you don't get charged on this crime. So they can lie about the evidence and they can lie about other circumstances having to do with the interrogation, but they can't tell lies that could be regarded as promises or threats.
Ochoa said his confession included details of the crime because police showed him pictures of the crime scene before his confession.
Why'd you do that?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a circumstance in which it would be appropriate, because it contaminates the suspect, and it means that if they are innocent and made the false confession, you'll never know.
Ochoa also says he was threatened physically.
Look me up and down and say, you're young, you've never been in jail, you're gonna be fresh meat, and they're gonna have you. I'll put you in the cell where they'll have you. And to me, in my mind, that triggered off, well, they're gonna rape me.
Experts say the way to prevent police-induced false confessions is to videotape the entire interrogation. If a suspect later alleges police misconduct in the interrogation room, the videotape can be evaluated.
If Chris's confession had been videotaped from start to end, There is no way that this would have happened. First of all, the police officers undoubtedly would not have acted as they did. It would have been a deterrent to their misconduct.
Currently, only 2 states require all suspect interrogations to be videotaped, Alaska and Minnesota. The Austin Police Department changed its policy and now videotapes the interrogations in all homicide cases. After 12 years in prison, on January 16, 2001, Chris Ochoa was a free man. 2 months later, Richard Danziger was released to the care of his family. Because of the brain damage he sustained as a result of the prison fight, Richard Danziger will require specialized care for the rest of his life.
Sometimes I think about Richard and he, you know, I feel very bad. I mean, because I didn't have the courage to face up whatever might come to me so that he wouldn't go to prison.
The officers involved in Chris Ochoa's interrogation have all refused to comment.
I was a little kid, they told me that police officers were there to take care of you, to protect you. I thought that they couldn't do no wrong. I thought they were honest. But I see that not all of them are.
I lost my child. I loved her so much. I miss her every day still. For 13 years, I miss her every day. And Chris lost 12 years, his youth, his whole youth. Richard Danziger is brain damaged from a beating he received in prison. He's still serving that life sentence. He'll serve it out.